Hello, welcome to the extra credits of Timothée Chalamet's A Complete Unknown. I'm Trey.
And I'm Kelsey.
So, Chalamet fans are thriving right now.
We are thriving.
We, all caps, are thriving. Earlier this year, Timothée Chalamet gave a career-defining performance as Paul Atreides in Dune Part 2.
Yeah.
Went full Anakin Skywalker Revenge of the Sith moment. I know that character is inspired by Paul Atreides, not the other way around. You get my point. That Dune Part 2 is one of the most impressive movies of 2024. Still arguably the best movie of the year. That performance is excellent.
Mm-hmm.
However, 6 months later, we have A Complete Unknown. We have this rendition of the Bob Dylan iconic figure, the myth more than the man.
Yeah.
And Timothée Chalamet's interpretation of what he thinks Bob Dylan is in this James Mangold film. And the rumors are, I guess not rumors, but just kind of the conversation around this performance is that Timothée Chalamet could be the youngest Best Actor Oscar winner of all time because of this role.
Yeah.
Even though I think the Paul Atreides role is probably a little bit more up there for me in my Chalamet rankings, which we can discuss a little bit today. I am really impressed by our guy watching these two movies this year.
Me too. Yeah, I went in with really low expectations, but for his performance and for the movie. But I was so surprised on both levels.
What's crazy is he's been on like an iconic run since 2017. You know, like with Call Me By Your Name, with Beautiful Boy, with Wonka, with Bones and All, like the Guadagnino projects, but also these kind of like obscure indie films / these like big projects that he's like really, you know, I think exceeded expectations in, which is a big deal. And now he's getting closer to 30, much like us. He's in our generation of like that zillennial, which we'll discuss in a little bit too, which I think is fascinating. And as far as him becoming this like first major zillennial icon in Hollywood next to Zendaya, I really feel like he's entering a moment right now of in 2024 currently where there's like either my algorithms are just Chalamet or he's which is likely, but he's like in this crossover of artistic fame and celebrity fame.
Yeah.
And we don't really care about celebrity, but in as far as using it the way that Chalamet is, which is trying to get people in theaters, it's pretty incredible.
It is,
Yeah, we just really haven't seen this recently.
It's wild too. Like, you know, we were talking about like what was the strategy from his PR team.
No idea,
but it's working.
Yeah.
And, you know, he's just like going into crowds of people. Like
he had the lookalike competition where he walked through like he was Paul Atreides. He's on red carpets doing like Dylan parody stuff. Like he's bringing Beyblades onto carpets again, going back to the zillennial of him. He's like headbanging to like Kid Cudi on red carpets. He's doing Soulja Boy with like Brittany Broski. He's doing College Game Day. He's just on one. He was on the Theo Von podcast and then was like, I like what you do, but I don't really know your podcast. I'm like, who set all this up? It's genius. I've never also seen him like since Wonka. He's always been a kind of reserved, like hot sad boy. That's been his bit, right? And he's been Timmy. He's really transformed into Timothy at this point, like where he is more
Timothée.
like turning into like a confident version of himself.
Yeah.
But since Wonka and that press run, I feel like he's been on this year-long press run of like showing, oh no, like I'm a confident artist.
Yeah.
And I just happen to be rich and happen to be a celebrity, but like I'm not from that background really. Like I've grown up in the arts, but I'm not. Like he was just explaining subsidized housing to Theo Von the other day on Theo Von's podcast and like what the apartments that his parents lived in. And like he just has such a fascinating background as just like one of the guys or like a normal person basically. And that's turned into this like larger than life symbol. Like it makes sense that he took on this Bob Dylan project, but I'm just like strangely, even though we're at such a distance, like proud to have somebody that represents
who feels like kind of normal in terms of like not totally detached. Right?
Exactly. And I think that's been like a cool thing to see because with zillennials, and I'm just like making this word up, I guess some people say it, but like that age group between the 28 to 32 group of people, adults who grew up with social media, but like sort of not really.
Yeah.
Like we were in that pre-digital footprint era, but yet had social media accounts in our adolescence. He seems to be in that phase of like being plugged into like what he needs to be doing as far as social media. But he also seems plugged out in a very similar way to our generation. It reminds me of, we just watched Dee, which is one of my favorite movies. I was just going to bring that up.
Of the year. How it felt like it captured kind of like what the start of YouTube and MySpace were.
Right. And it feels like it's representing this pre-social media generation, like right on the cusp of it. And so it's cool to see somebody like him that is this successful and is this willing to put themselves out there. And he's also an East Coaster, and you can feel the neurotic energy coming from him, which is, right on for what Bob Dylan represents too. As East Coasters ourselves, or former East Coasters now, like it's deeply relatable to see somebody who is like strangely confident but also neurotic, like having this level of fame. So yeah, it's pretty awesome to see what he's been doing on this press run. This should be a good moment to say that we're doing a Chalamet month right now on Patreon. We're covering Little Woman, we're covering Call Me By Your Name, and we're running an exclusive right now on our Patreon account, which you can check in our description of this episode on YouTube or on Spotify, wherever you're watching or listening to this. And if you sign up as a free member on Patreon, then you'll be able to access our collections tab of free episodes where you can access Dune Part 1, in which we did a 4+ hour deep dive into the text of Dune, a novel, a Frank Herbert novel we had not read up until that point, where we were reading samples of it or kind of like snippets of it, and then really deep diving the movie that Denis Villeneuve gave us and the performance of Chalamet, kind of going
after
from
that pod, I was
young boy Messiah to adult Messiah.
Love this maybe more than the first time I watched it, but then also I was like, it was in. It's up there now with like Dune Part 2 also. Like I like it for different reasons.
Yes, they're different movies. I think I like Dune Part 1 a little bit more than Dune Part 2, but Dune Part 2 is like unquestionably more quote unquote epic.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
And
it's more spectacle driven.
He's given maybe more to do.
I think so too.
In Part 2.
Right. So yeah, I mean, we're also new to video podcasts. If you're watching this on YouTube, go ahead, like and subscribe. Comment below. Let us know what some of your favorite Chalamet movies have been in his project thus far.
Yeah.
He's had a really kind of like eclectic career in the past 7 or 8 years. He's done so many different types of movies. Some argue that his supporting roles are better than some of his major roles, like leading roles. I don't know if you want to talk about this, but in terms of rankings, I don't mind making this, like putting this out there, because I just made a Letterboxd list. And
I saw that. Was that because I saw the movies, you were doing just his performance, right?
Just his performances, not the movies, if that makes sense. Yeah. So
that's what I thought when I was like,
I think real Chalamet heads know number one is like tied between Call Me By Your Name and Beautiful Boy. Like those are like the two like most obvious, most clearly like career defining roles in, as far as if you're a film fan, and something, if you're also like a fan of award shows, something that he should have been more recognized for in terms of winning more awards for those roles, especially Beautiful Boy, and what that movie represented. And then Dune Part 2 obviously is in that conversation. I think A Complete Unknown, which is the movie we're going to be talking about today, is in that conversation. That's how good he is in this movie. And then maybe Bones and All, but that's like a personal pick. I tried to be as objective as I could have been, but like I really love that Guadagnino movie, and I think he's the most charismatic he's ever been in that role in any of his movies. A Complete Unknown, some people have said that he's charismatic, and he is, but it's because he's Timmy. I think what he's trying to do is be anti-charisma, which is interesting. So yeah, people can check our Letterboxd too in the description to see that list.
I'm gonna save my ranking for our Call Me By Your Name, because I have to think about it a little bit more, but I do agree that Call Me By Your Name is like really up there with Beautiful Boy,
right? But
there is something about that being his earlier career and kind of what he's able to deliver in a Dune Part 2 that almost makes me like put that above Beautiful Boy.
He's so good in Dune Part 2.
Yeah.
So I get it. Yeah. I mean, it's, it could be one of those things we look back on. It's so recent, but like 10 years from now, where it's like so clearly his best performance. It's just hard to know.
Yeah.
Because it's so recent.
I have to think about it more.
Yeah. So the cool thing about Chalamet's work is he doesn't have a bad performance. In those supporting roles, like we watched Little Woman and Call Me By Your, or Little Woman and, Lady Bird recently. And he's just so good at playing the sad boy. You can't help but be sympathetic for her to differing degrees in those two films, but especially Little Woman as Laurie. And he's clearly taken on the Leonardo DiCaprio playbook, the Christian Bale playbook, the Joaquin Phoenix playbook.
And he's talked about that too. Yeah.
He said the movie that inspired him to want to be an actor was like The Dark Knight, and watching Heath Ledger and Christian Bale in that film. And that's very relatable for us in terms of what inspired us to be movie fans, was like sitting in an IMAX in 2008 and watching this like
Heath Ledger,
Heat, the Heat remake into this superhero film.
Yeah.
So, that's like an iconic thing to say, but I believe it. He feels like somebody who is trying to study the choices of those kinds of actors, Heath Ledger included. And so he is a sort of like, you can't really attach one actor to him. He just feels like multiple like celebrities at once. And he's also like not even though the college game day thing I think is confusing some people, his new fans, but he's not exactly like a aggro, like hyper masculine, playboy kind of guy. Like, if that makes sense. He's not a Leo DiCaprio. He doesn't treat himself seriously like a Christian Bale.
Yeah.
He's not eccentric enough to be a Joaquin Phoenix. He's a little bit too relatable, and I would say that I would argue that he is like just a little bit like chill in different ways compared to those other people.
Yeah.
Even though he's like, he's very volatile.
Yeah,
in his
I think it is really fascinating to see like all the different things he's doing in this press run and all the kind of different personas people are like tagging on to him. And because we've been following him for so long and he's just in our algorithm since we're like similar age, it's like, I don't know that he is actually that guy. But so that's really like interesting. And I'm interested to see like all the new fans that come to him. But also, just before we move on, it's so funny that Heath Ledger and Christian Bale played Bob Dylan. And
I know. In the Todd Haynes film, and now he's going for it too. Yeah. It makes sense. I mean, he's doing another biopic with the ping pong movie with the Safdie brother next year.
Excited.
Like a Wolf of Wall Street, Catch Me If You Can movie. Yeah. I can't wait. And it's Gwyneth Paltrow is the love interest, I think. Like,
oh, wow.
Say less. So, yeah, I mean, he's one of our favorite actors, you know, of our generation.
Yeah.
Like, my favorite actor right now is Robert Pattinson, but Chalamet's in that tier, in that conversation.
And
there's others like Flo Pugh or Saoirse
Ronan.
Type
of silly, you know, like press run vibe from like a Pattinson.
An absurdist
and Timmy that
press run on
we
his
personally
end,
love to see.
Yes. So there's a lot of great actors of his generation, but I think Timmy has this strange self-effacing absurdity while also having insane, charming charisma that is just hard to like give honestly voice to. It's hard to talk about like some people who have that kind of energy, which like there's a gravitational pull to him that a lot of people feel. Okay, so I'm sure people who came to listen to us talk about Bob Dylan are like, what the hell? You're gonna get it. I've done a lot of prep. I'm not a Bob Dylan guy. I've weirdly turned into one over the past month.
Listened to a lot of music.
Yes.
Yeah, we're not Bob Dylan people.
Yeah.
So like that is also something to know going into this.
Right.
If we get some details wrong about Bob Dylan's life, like you know, kindly correct us in the comments. That's fine. But
well, I don't care. We came prepared. We're wearing all black.
I know.
We have these sunglasses from at our critics screening. They gave us these. Yeah, we can put them on. I don't know if I can. I think hopefully we look sick.
Men in Black?
It looks Men in Black, doesn't it? It doesn't. I thought the same thing. We'll just like edit this out.
Can you see any of them?
No, that's what I'm saying.
Okay,
our lighting isn't blinding me at least. No, we can't continue with this. Maybe we'll use it for the thumbnail.
Should we pose?
I hope we look sick. All right. Okay, so a complete unknown. We tried to like channel Bob Dylan today. It's hard to channel Bob Dylan because there's so many different interpretations of who he is.
Yeah.
Even to the man himself. And in a complete unknown.
Does Bob Dylan know who Bob Dylan is?
Does he even exist?
Yeah. I
think he would like that question. He's still alive today. I do think that, you know, he would genuinely like that question. This movie is really good.
Yeah.
I think it's really good. It seems to be pretty divisive online.
I think it's great.
We're not Dylan heads though.
Yeah.
So we just recently, you know what I mean?
True.
We just recently became aware of this person. We'll talk about our relationship to him in a second. But A Complete Unknown is a really conventional movie that is really good at what it's conventional at, if that makes sense. It is like two different movies at the same time. And I think one is really fun and interesting and good. And the other is underdeveloped, yet it's interesting that it's in the film.
Yeah.
So let's get into like why, you know, that is before we dive too deep into spoilers. So we'll still stick in non-spoiler territory right now because we're recording this a little bit early before it comes out wide because we saw it so many weeks ago now. I've seen it twice.
Yeah.
So A Complete Unknown, directed by James Mangold, based on a book called Dylan Goes Electric, which details Dylan's famous 1965 performance at the Newport Folk Festival, I believe is what it's called, which becomes a major moment in the film, a great tense moment, but a great moment of music in this movie. And the music in this film is incredible.
Yeah.
Where we get to see Dylan transform and kind of reinvent his musical identity, going electric, essentially. Not just something better, but to something different, I think, as he puts it in a cafe with Elle Fanning's character when they're talking about another public figure. And the book, you know, that real life book, and then this film approached Dylan's life with this very cautious lens in the mid to late 1960s with care. They're hoping to contextualize him as this like unknowable icon. They want to also unpack the public and media narrativizing his life and identity. And I personally think the film successfully, at a high level, depicts a powerful transformation of this unknowable artist that doesn't necessarily depict him as a depressed genius.
Yeah.
This is like a great man myth movie.
Yeah.
I don't think it is. It also doesn't depict him as this like aspirational, larger than life figure. And instead, the movie tries to depict him as this sort of confusing, enigmatic, fascinating American cultural symbol or artifact, less than an actual a man that we can know that much about. And to do this, they give us some like former folk stars that inspired him on his journey to come to New York in the first place from Minnesota. We also get this love triangle that unpacks the audience's relationship to different eras of Dylan, like how they think they know him, but might not totally know him, which is similar to the woman in his life. And they become the emotional core of the story, especially the folk singers too, with Woody Guthrie in particular, and Pete Seeger as well. And so there's like the biographical part of this movie, the biopic part of A Complete Unknown, I think is really effective and successful, even if it's just a series of like linear vignettes, which are conventional and standard. I just think James Mangold is good at making rewatchable like dad movies, and this movie is one of those. Yeah, it is like a Ford versus Ferrari in a sense, like which is his 2019
and it uses
film.
kind of like the festival, how you're talking about, as like a pinnacle point to show a shift, right, in the narrative. Like that felt really successful.
Yes. However, and this is where like the movie, it's not perfect. It has a ceiling. The film also attempts to find a deeper, more important through line, if you will, considering the era, the civil rights era, considering what this Bob Dylan figure meant to the public and meant to people who are being exploited or oppressed or marginalized in this era and still are. And so that more nuanced through line that this movie is trying to hit on in terms of what Dylan represents politically, and then his transformative journey alongside that, and kind of paralleling his transformative journey with the cultural and musical revolution of the time. Whether that's successful or not, I think is up for debate. And I think that's what we're going to be discussing a lot today, because you have this era in the 60s of civil rights tensions, you have racism, you have anti-Semitism on TVs a lot, not necessarily on the forefront of this film. You have conversations about desegregation. You have, as a result, like these massive protests, sometimes, again, on screen, sometimes on random TVs. You have whispers of new legislation. You have oncoming or, just happened assassinations. So you have Dylan kind of walking into Greenwich Village, becoming this star during this revolutionary era and time where he gives voice to people who are voiceless, and using this democratization of music through folk music and the evolution to pop and rock at the same time, to try to give people a power through language and communicating through music. And we also see music executives behind the scenes kind of reckoning with the fact that they can't pressure musicians just to do like traditional songs anymore, because there are all these musicians in the 60s coming out of this era, including like Johnny Cash or Joan Baez, who are trying to have a voice in these troubling times and be artists. And so Dylan becomes one of these musicians who are breaking traditions and conventions and mirroring these human rights movements. And this movie, and this is where it struggles, I think attempts to use Dylan as like a Rosetta Stone of the moment. And I don't think it totally does. I don't think it totally knows how to, and I don't think it feels comfortable in that space. Strangely. Well,
I think, again, I was like laughing before when I was like, it's a great movie. It's also because I know nothing about Bob Dylan. So like as a movie going in with low expectations, it worked because of the reasons that you're talking about, just like technically and pacing and storytelling. But I think I watched the documentary on Max. What was that one called? The 90-minute one.
Don't Look Now, Don't Look Back.
Yeah. And Don't Look Now. But that documentary, when I watched the Bob Dylan kind of like interviews, that how he was interacting with press, and different answers he was giving in terms of like what his songs mean, my reaction was that, I watched a completely different, interpretation of who Bob Dylan was.
That's
in the
really
Timothée
the point.
Chalamet film. And also it felt like they didn't really go into some complicated features of what Bob Dylan means to culture.
Yes.
And also what his songs, and his maybe responsibility or not, that he is maybe like, I guess like, or willing to have for like the words or lyrics of his song. The film just kind of like totally sidestepped that, but I didn't know at all because I just don't have a relationship to Dylan. But that was interesting, and I wish you're right. Like, I think there's a ceiling in the sense that it's safe in a lot of ways, right?
Right. Yeah. And
film.
so, yes, it is very safe in many ways, especially politically. And really, that's kind of what I was getting to, which is that the movie seems to be like trading a lot of that kind of reactionism of the time, or the conversations about, is Bob Dylan an anarchist or a chaotic person? What does he think politically? And because this is during like a Red Scare movement, you see also like Red Scare imagery throughout A Complete Unknown. And so it's not like they're not discussing it, or it's not like it's not a part of the text of the film. It's in the imagery of the movie.
Right.
It's just that they're not really expressing too much about it. And it seems way more interested in Bob Dylan's relationship to his own identity through the woman in his life, and also Woody Guthrie in particular, the man in the hospital, for those who don't know, and Scoot McNairy's character, who is dealing with an illness and doesn't pass away in the film. And so he's kind of he becomes like a symbol or motif in the movie, where it's like this recurring thing that Bob Dylan goes to do when he doesn't know, almost like, this is my interpretation, doesn't know quite who he is anymore. He's been trying to discover a new identity for himself, and we know he's changed his name, and in real life he did a few times, moving from Minnesota to New York. And him as Bob Dylan, it feels like he never got to shape his own identity before the media got a hold of him and was shaping his identity for him or the public at large. And he never got to really pay homage to Woody Guthrie in a way that he thought was significant. And it sort of feels like he's reckoning with the fact that he thinks that he stole the soul of somebody who died too young. And like he's carrying, this legacy forward, but also wants to have his own identity, which is why him going electric is such a big deal. It's not because he's a contrarian, which he sort of is, in real life. It's not because he's counterculture, which he certainly is in real life. But it's also because he's trying to find his own artistic space, his voice, his own identity, which I think is actually really beautiful and aspirational. And like, I think the movie gets that across. I just think, unfortunately, what it exchanges for that Woody Guthrie part and the love triangle part is this more kind of like politically confrontational part of Bob Dylan's life. That if you watch the Martin Scorsese documentary, which you can right now on YouTube or Netflix, or the Don't Look Back documentary that you're talking about, the 90-minute one, or if you watch, honestly, like any really Bob Dylan interview from the 1960s, he is like a politically challenging person. He is confrontational. He's obviously clearly using music as a way to communicate to young people, but also like he's speaking to like Congress in his songs. Like, and so that aspect of this movie is really missed because they almost paint Timothée Chalamet's, the direction, the interpretation of Dylan is safer. And it's not Chalamet's fault. Chalamet kills it in terms of what he was asked to do. It's just that they paint him more to be like Yoda. They paint him like he's just hiding. He's a recluse and he's apathetic, indifferent. Elle Fanning's character introduces him to civil rights.
It's not a great man movie at all, but it does have this like quiet genius, like, threads in it a little bit.
Yeah, there are moments like where Joan Baez is like listening in on his music and then comes to sit next to him and it's like, how did you do that? He's like, I'm in the carnival. It's like, whoa, you were in the carnival? It's like, I don't believe, like the character's like, I don't believe you. And so, there's a little bit of that, but also there's not enough maybe that he was like, because my interpretation, I guess we can just talk about it now. My interpretation of Bob Dylan from the documentaries, like the real life Bob Dylan, because I've had to do a lot of like prep for this episode. I watched the two major documentaries about his life, which are like a total like 5 hours of runtime. I've read a lot of work about his life, not just during the 60s, but post 60s. And I don't think this movie actually agrees with my take. So I'll just say mine, which is that I think Bob Dylan is like a deeply angry, lost intellectual in this 1960s, and instead he's painted as somebody who is sort of unaware in the movie. And I think that is convenient because then it leans itself into a safer approach cinematically. You can rely on other characters giving Bob Dylan a voice and an emotion. And that's certainly interesting. Like the woman in this movie in particular, like Monica Barbaro as Joan Baez or Elle Fanning as the other woman in this film, both giving great performances, especially Barbaro, who we'll discuss, who's my extra credits of this film.
She was amazing,
On the surface, it's interesting because it's like, here are the women that are actually making the genius, but we've seen that trope before, and it's like so unnecessary to continue that instead of actually giving us fully developed characters, especially for Joan Baez in her own right, being this like talented musician of her era. But it leans into like Pete Seeger and Woody Guthrie, all these other people who make up what we know of as Bob Dylan from the 1960s as this like protest singer, this folk singer turned protest singer turned pop rock radical singer. And instead of actually looking at maybe those interviews with a little bit more of a scathing lens, which he seems like he was frustrated with how the media was co-opting his name, and also frustrated that he was sort of rejecting his responsibility to be a little bit more direct in the media. There's a lot of self-hate that I'm interpreting when watching Bob Dylan in documentaries, like when he's confronting interviewers. Like he obviously hates what they do for a living in terms of trying to search for a headline and like what he's not doing correctly, or trying to co-opt his words and the meaning of what his words mean to them.
Yeah.
And Bob Dylan knows he's living in a time where people are going to jail and being identified as communists. And so he's like afraid of being too clear in his politics, but you could see the regret in his face, like mid answering when he's like, or if he's like flipping a question back on an interviewer.
Yeah.
So there are all these like, what I'm talking about really are like complexities of a human being who is a larger than life figure who didn't mean to be one. And so like, that aspect of Bob Dylan's life is totally missed in this movie. I mean, in my opinion.
Yeah, I mean, I was surprised to see the footage of him like this like confrontational person that I didn't feel like I even saw in the movie. It felt like he was like way more, I guess, reserved and wasn't like kind of. There is one moment, right, where Joan Baez is like, you're kind of an asshole, like Bob or whatever, because he tells her that her songs are like oil paintings in like a dentist office, right? Yeah. So there's like a moment of that, but I didn't feel like I was seeing a kind of like person who was actively like, confronting and having like these kind of like emotionally really like challenging moments with people around him, where it was like unclear, at least just from my interpretation of like how much he was in on this idea that he was actually challenging them because he disagreed with like maybe what the journalists were doing completely, as much as also he like didn't know how much, this is just my interpretation, I was like, how much responsibility is he comfortable with, I guess, like taking in terms of his the lyrics of his songs, and like that felt like kind of I guess something that was that would be interesting to explore. At least I would like to see in a film of like, well, like how much as a figure, like is he built up in terms of the contrast of how he is like willing to take maybe just like the weight of like what he's saying and so that was a really interesting tension, at least in the documentaries. And again, of course there's always like a framing, but those were very clear in his conversations with journalists and with his team around
especially
him.
Don't Look Back, like when he was talking to the Time interviewer, for example. And it was like very clear that, because sometimes when you listen to Bob Dylan fans, and we have some people in our life who are Bob Dylan fans who we went to go see the movie with and also discussed the movie with, and this is a big question a lot of Dylan fans have online that I've noticed, is how aware is Bob Dylan of his own counterculture persona? Like, how aware is he as this like politically radical person? Like, does he actually have an ethos, or does his music accidentally just speak to the moment? How much of it is the subconscious coming through versus the intentionality of his music? And he's somebody who rejects intentionality in the era of the 60s and post, and still today, I think. Like, he rejects the idea of like him needing to explain intention because of the way that people will ultimately run with that story-wise. My view of Bob Dylan is that he was living in an era where it was kind of like he can't be direct. He can't be too self-aware because then he is held to a higher standard. And I think that he was struggling with, should I become a social rights activist or should I stay a musician? And that's really in trying to balance those two things at the same time. And clearly Timothée Chalamet relates to this. I mean, Timothée Chalamet does movies about a drug epidemic in this country. He does movies about colonialism and false messiahs, and like he does movies about imperialism. He's doing films about like child films like Wonka, but then you watch Wonka and it's like this toxicity of religion, right? And capitalism. And like he's doing movies about big ideas, though if you ask Timothée Chalamet a question about his politics in an interview, he won't answer the question. Like he won't answer directly, at least.
Because he like identifies as an artist. Yeah, which we don't need to be looking at our artists, right? For like I guess like specific guidance in terms of like politics, but it is interesting. But there is also like a convenient, nature that I was seeing in the like Bob Dylan interviews at the same time, right? Of like rejecting responsibility. But again, I am interested to do like more research on him as a figure, because it was fascinating to just watch him talk about his songs. And so, because but I also want to say, like, haven't watched everything, don't know everything. That was just like my interpretation from.
You think Dylan fans are going to come for us in the comments?
Well, I'm protecting I'm protecting.
Guys, like we're trying. Like it's not like like I like the history of hip hop and rap music. Like I've always made, this is my bias. Going into the Bob Dylan movie, I was not excited for A Complete Unknown. And as far as it being a Bob Dylan biopic, I was excited as a Chalamet fan. I did not realize I'd walk out turning into a Dylan like fan. Like at least I'm a fan of the concept of Bob Dylan.
Yeah, like I want to know more about like what he means culturally.
And that has surprised me because I had always viewed, and again, this is
I'd always been uninterested in him too.
Well, I think because Bob Dylan was supposed to represent a voice for the voiceless of the 60s and on. But in our generation, I've always attached Bob Dylan to the demographic that's in love with him, which tends to be like this overly educated, like upper middle class demographic who's like obsessed with this like counterculture revolutionary that almost treats him more as an aesthetic than a real person.
And it was also like how,
So I've always I've been allergic to Bob Dylan, but I've realized that me and Bob Dylan share the same allergy, which is that we're both allergic to the way that people have taken his name and ran with it in a different way, which is like certainly what he in those documentaries talks about a lot, which is like, no, I didn't say that. You said that. Like that kind of energy he would put on. That's another thing. Like Bob Dylan is pissed. Like if you watch those documentaries, he's an angry guy. He's like hitting his face on the microphone and doing his songs and live concerts.
Well,
and like,
oh, you know what? Timmy did do that in the movie.
There are moments of that, but
it
felt more like he was just doing it for entertainment sake or performance
or
sake.
it felt like I was seeing someone like in the character like deal with something internally or like be, have conflicting feelings. It didn't feel angry like I kind of saw in the true Bob Dylan footage.
Right. Yeah. And so I guess my point is that this movie, it's two separate films. I really like one of them. The other one like frustrates us, but it's like endlessly something you can like discuss, right? Which is like, does this movie is it even aware of its own politics that it could be more aware of?
Yeah.
And it is like, there's moments where you have music executives being anti-Semitic. And there's a moment where you realize Bob Dylan changes the last name from Zimmerman to Dylan. Maybe arguing that he came from like Jewish roots in Minnesota, which I think we've learned in real life that he did. And he doesn't discuss those things very much. He's very private, right, in real life. He actually didn't even see this movie yet, I believe, but he gave notes on the screenplay. He was offered to give notes on it, and the only thing he gave notes on was the love triangle.
Okay.
He wanted to get Elle Fanning's character in particular more context because apparently she was more of a tropey character in the original screenplay, which makes sense that he would want to give a note on that, considering it is his real life, but it's other people's lives that are kind of being manipulated in pop culture in this way. But there's also like really kind of, I don't know, the movie feels uncomfortable when it tries to do something political. Like there's real life footage of Dylan that Elle Fanning's character is watching on a bed at one point in one of the vignettes of this movie. And it's footage of Bob Dylan in the famous March on Washington. And it's Chalamet's face composited over the real life footage of Bob Dylan. And it looks embarrassing, like visually.
Yeah.
And it also feels politically
Timothée
embarrassing because
Chalamet,
it's unexamined.
Yeah.
In terms of what that significant moment meant for him in that era.
Yeah,
and
that was
it almost doesn't want to lean into that too
sequence,
much.
Yeah,
because then it has to have that conversation. And there's also no openly Jewish characters in the film, I believe. There's not many black characters in the movie or like developed characters.
Yeah,
and so like it's a very white dad movie because it's made by James Mangold. But fortunately, the performances are so good. And the direction is, again, what it's conventional at. It's really cinematically like great at that I am giving it like a little bit of like a pass in as far as having this ceiling of like a 3.5 to 4-star movie that I just had a really good time with in the theaters. But that is just so underwhelming considering the era, like intellectually underwhelming considering what it could have done. It really made me throughout the movie go, this is really well shot. This is really well scored. Great design. Performances are incredible. They're letting these actors breathe.
Story,
good practical world building of the 1960s. I believed where they told me I was. But it really made me want to see somebody like Paul Thomas Anderson make this movie.
Yeah.
Or Steven Soderbergh, right?
Yeah.
Like David Fincher, Danny Boyle, like
really
somebody else.
Someone
Spike
like
Lee.
interrogate and kind of address like
Scorsese.
what Bob Dylan means culturally in terms of his lyrics, rather than just like Bob Dylan as an artist that is an enigma. Like,
right. Yeah, I mean, because that's really what they focus on is that he's basically unknowing. Okay, we can get more into the movie. So this is a biopic, like we were saying. So the movie does start off with Timothée Chalamet's Bob Dylan kind of walking into New York City, looking for Woody Guthrie. And Woody Guthrie, again, like I said, becomes like a motif of the film. And I think
a reflection point for like Timmy
to reflect on his identity.
Bob Dylan.
And maybe Timmy, I don't know. And you really believe where you are. Like I said, the sets feel tangible. I think the atmosphere is felt, which it was in Ford versus Ferrari. It was in Logan. We've seen James Mangold do this.
Yeah.
No comment on Indiana Jones 5 or whatever last year. That was tough. But I do remember the sets of that movie actually being pretty epic sometimes. But so he's good at building a world, and his team is. But we see that he is, over the next 5 years, I think from 61 to 66, I'm forgetting exactly the timeline, but he's struggling with the fact that his musical identity is really owed to this dying man in a hospital. And then he can't really find his own identity before it's too late, before he's recognized by his fans and the media and public at large that he is this new folk singer that Seeger, Edward Norton's character, is introducing as like somebody who's going to bring back traditional music.
Yeah.
While you have Bob Dylan sending like love letters to Johnny Cash, as Boyd Holbrook's Johnny Cash, who is also
so good,
very compelling.
I didn't realize it was him until you told me. Like, and also,
he's totally immersed in it.
Like singing wise, I asked like, is that him? I mean, I think Timmy, his singing also is great. Like that's also I think why I came into this movie low expectations for a biopic, but also low expectations, especially for stars singing in a movie like about an artist,
right?
And I thought it was good.
Yeah, no, I thought he was excellent. I think a lot of the singing's excellent. I mean, Joan Baez like has like an angelic voice, and I think Monica Barbaro nails that. Yeah, really well. So yeah, I think over the 5 years we see Chalamet kind of go through this these different views on like how Bob Dylan dressed, how he spoke, how he handled himself openly in public, the different kind of relationships he had, and the movie is less interested, and I think Chalamet too, less interested in creating a caricature of Bob Dylan, even though right away you're worried in the hospital when he's like speaking under his breath.
Yeah.
But Timmy is so committed on like giving his own sensibilities over to this character. He's not committed to doing like a total recreation of who Bob Dylan was in documentaries. It's very clear that Chalamet had like an idea of like how he wanted to add his own style. Like there is something a little bit like self-assured about Chalamet's Dylan, while also being insecure, while also being a little bit fragile, but also there's something sensual about him that is very Chalamet coded, because Bob Dylan, like, I guess say what you want in terms of like how hot you think the man, the myth, the legend is, but he was like a really angry guy, and I think that's where a lot of people projected attractiveness onto him. Chalamet's doing it more so like I'm understated, and that's what's interesting about me. So again, don't come for us in the comments if you disagree with that. It's just my take. But yeah, I mean, I think it was interesting to watch him go through these like 5 years unpacking, Chalamet's performance, unpacking the myth of what Bob Dylan is to us and maybe him, and just kind of give us that strange charisma that Chalamet has too. And so, yeah, I mean, what did you think about the love triangle versus the doctor sequences, going back to see Pete Seeger and then seeing Woody Guthrie, versus going to see this love triangle, versus going to maybe the more political, like how in on the being a revolutionary is Bob Dylan? Those three storylines, like which one did you find yourself most captivated by, regardless of like the one that maybe you wanted to see the most? Like which one do you think worked the most in this movie?
Yeah. Well, I mean, for the reasons we just talked about, the kind of political like aspects of the story kind of fell flat. And I wanted to see more, especially with Elle Fanning's character and kind of like, and Bob Dylan in that sequence. But I think the love triangle like really worked
think so
for
too.
Me. It kept me emotionally really like anchored in the movie, especially towards the end. Do we say spoilers?
Yeah, spoilers, yeah.
But especially towards the end of the movie where he's like running after Elle Fanning's, character, like at the ferry, and there's this like sense of him like losing this relatable like or like whatever is like true to him and his as a person like aspect. That was like really interesting, just emotionally, like to keep me in the story, and I felt like it really like delivered at the end. I believed their relationship, even though Timmy did such a good job of being so reserved and kind of like standoffish to the women and purposely being at arm's length at all times. But I still believed in the characters and how they were like attracted to each other, or like, the conversations that they were having, even though some pieces felt written. I guess like I was in the movie, it was successful in the context of the film.
Yes, they made the gravitational pull of Bob Dylan of this era, or at least in this fictional movie, like relatable enough where you kind of buy into the fact that these two like gorgeous, intelligent women would like still kind of deal with his BS and want to be with him to a certain extent. Like,
do it,
yeah. And so the one thing, okay, so my interpretation of what the goal was with the love triangle was to obviously learn more about Bob Dylan as they were trying to learn more about him.
Yeah.
But that Joan Baez, the character of Joan Baez in this movie, maybe not in real life, and Monica Barbaro's performance is supposed to be illustrating that these are people who have an idea of who Bob Dylan is. And Joan Baez falls in love with Bob Dylan's writing. She falls in love with what he represents as a symbol. And Elle Fanning's character actually wants to know Bobby. Like she wants to know him. And she may have fallen in love with this person.
Yeah.
And so the movie is like showing Dylan at a crossroads of, does he want to be a guy or does he want to be a myth?
Dude. I'm just kidding.
Or dude, I guess. Yeah. But I think that is what the movie is positing. Like,
I think that's true. I didn't even think about like what their relationships represented.
Does he want to live in a flat?
But I think you're right. Yeah,
and
like
be an
it does
artist
capture
with Elle Fanning.
that tension.
Yeah.
Of what he is kind of like reckoning with. As like how the culture is seeing him. Versus like that's what I was saying. Like when he finally goes to chase her at the ferry, it is like him like almost like actively understanding that he might be letting go of like that piece of him, of anyone really like knowing him.
He brings like a real quiet melancholy to that moment that I don't think the real life Bob Dylan seems to like have access to.
Just
which,
from
again,
what we've
like,
seen at least.
I like from those documentaries of that specific era. To be clear, I've never really watched anything 70s on. I know Scorsese did some other stuff in the 70s with Bob Dylan, which I'm excited to check out after this. It'll feel like a sequel in my mind. Because I truly know nothing post-civil rights era about Dylan's like life and like what he did in concerts. But yeah, I mean, it seems like Chalamet added a melancholy. He added something like she seems to love, how he had kind of has these like, I think he like filters his mind through his music, his folk music and so on. And Joan Baez seems to like really love that versus like, there is this something about how grounded and normal the Bob Dylan figure actually is behind the myth that the Elle Fanning character deeply relates to. I just wish these two characters were like actually characters, and especially Joan Baez's character. Like this is a famous star, but Elle Fanning's character too. Like we learn that she's a painter. There's a party at her house at one point. They show her paintings. There's obviously like these attempts at contextualizing the woman behind the myth, right? And so the movie doesn't want to be tropey, it doesn't want to be superficial, but it almost becomes more obvious that it is superficial because even when they attempt, you're like, this isn't still like a developed character. So that's unfortunate, but it's Elle Fanning, who I've never seen give a bad performance. It's Monica Barbaro, who I don't know much about, but she was one of the pilots in Top Gun Maverick, which is why Tom Cruise came to the screening. And did a picture with Timmy, which I thought was AI.
I was wondering why he was there. I asked you if that was fake.
I thought it was AI. I was like, wow, this is really getting sadly good. But no, it was real. Tom Cruise and Timothée Chalamet in a picture. So yeah, like we have that love triangle that I think is also really compelling. I don't think it works I think the hospital stuff works a little bit less, but ultimately the movie ends kind of going from that broken love triangle to Bob Dylan making this final trip before his infamous motorcycle crash that is off screen in this movie, meaning you wouldn't even know it about the crash if you didn't know anything about his life. And
our friend was who really like knows a lot about Bob Dylan was so surprised they didn't put it in the movie.
Well, so I think
they like allude to it, obviously, like you're saying.
In my research, it's a controversial subject because I think the movie posits a little bit. It's going into the conspiracy of like, did Bob Dylan get into as severe an accident as it was reported in the news? Because maybe this love triangle and this going into this like latter half of the civil rights era, going into a post 65 next 5 years, is Dylan needing a break of like in terms of the way that he is molded by the media, and also considering he just like left these two partners in his life because apparently he took like a long break from music after this accident. And it was reported that he had like these major injuries. No idea about. I'm assuming all that's true, but apparently the reason the movie is playing into the mystery of that is it just seemed like he needed a break, and that and Woody Guthrie also died like off screen a little bit after that final meetup in the hospital. And that might have left an impact on him, considering this was like a very iconic figure to him that inspired him to come to New York City in the first place. And that's kind of where the movie ends. We skipped over a lot of stuff. We skipped over a lot of great music, a lot of great live performances, a lot of great Chalamet staring not quite into the lens of the camera, but right off the lens and doing these little these subtle facial gestures.
Yeah,
like him sort of being attracted alone to Johnny Cash doing music, or other moments when he's alone watching people.
Yeah, well, I just love the what Timmy is doing here. Obviously, it's, so much of it is subtle in terms of his inner conflict that he's able to show just through his facial expressions. But yeah. And the concerts too, even while he's performing, that is really well done.
I have a lot of favorite music from Bob Dylan now that I've been listening to him nonstop for a month. It's really just been Kendrick's new album, Bob Dylan, which probably makes no sense to my algorithms. But it is Girl from the Northern Country is one of my favorite songs from him. And I like him and Monica Barbara's rendition of that.
Oh, are we about to do a top 3?
No, I was just going to note that surprisingly, one song that I've never really seen in the Bob Dylan soundtrack is the song to Woody. The song that he sings to Woody Guthrie. It's actually the first song in the movie, I believe, where Chalamet walks into the hospital. Yeah. Gets kind of jump scared by a custodian, mopping the floor, which I noticed on the second watch. I was like, why'd they shoot that so scarily? And he walks into Pete Seeger and Woody Guthrie talking, and then he sings that song. It is a very dim lighted scene. Yeah. And it's a really emotional scene on rewatch, considering that that's a father figure to him. In the movie, it presents him that way. And when you see Woody hitting the table that he was happy with the performance that Bobby just gave to him, I was really in. I mean, I just called him Bobby. I feel like I know Bobby. You know what I mean? I was this is great stuff. And there's other, very good songs in this movie that are tense, especially when Monica Barbara's character and Timothée Chalamet's character are starting to be at odds with one another, and they're singing on stage. You really feel that tension. But yeah, do you have any other favorite songs you want to mention or favorite performances?
Not songs, because I can't really remember any they were all pretty good, and I'm also not a huge Bob Dylan fan in terms of knowing specific names of the songs. But I think in terms of the actual performances, can we do extra credits?
Sure, now? We can do extra. Let's do it. Yeah,
my extra credit is the singing, because I am normally not in on the kind of performances that actors give with singing, especially if it's a really well-known person. Even though I'm not a huge fan of Bob Dylan, I've heard Bob Dylan songs before, right? And there's so much kind of risk within that. But I thought Timmy did a great job.
So good.
I thought Joan Baez.
Were you surprised? Monica Barbara was the actor.
Also amazing vocals, and they also did so well doing duets. I was just shocked.
Were you surprised how good Chalamet was? Because obviously,
in terms of singing was.
Because obviously we just saw Wonka, right? It feels like 2 months ago, but it was almost a year ago now.
Yeah.
And it's hard to be the Gene Wilder performance, but it's just a different performance. It's a different movie. Yeah. The character demands different roles. I'm so in on the Gene Wilder performance that I really wanted that in this Wonka, and it took me a minute to I saw past it.
Yeah.
I was really impressed what Chalamet's doing in that movie, just because he's being so extra. But he's asked to be so extra, and ultimately it's a kid's film, and it made $700 million or something.
It was made for kids.
Right.
The Gene Wilder performance, I think, was a little bit, he was doing this it's just a different movie, right? So yeah. So I take back anything I said previously on the pod. I think Timmy was good at Wonka.
I like the times they are changing when I think Monica Barbara's character goes into the basement of a bar because everyone's trying to leave Greenwich Village because of the Cuban Missile Crisis, I believe, and they think there's going to be a nuclear holocaust, and they're really speaking to that era. They're trying to put the stakes being that there's a tumultuous time politically, but also globally, not just domestically, and I think they get that across. But Bob Dylan just goes to sing people a song, responding to that era, something that he had already written, that we saw him starting to write, and her sort of falling in love with him taking action in a way, it was a form of protest. He wouldn't even leave. He's I'm just going to stay here with these people. And I really love that moment. And I think it speaks to what you're saying. The music's really good, but also these performers are unafraid to fully make these songs their own. If you listen to Chalamet singing, they released the album on Spotify or I think, all apps, whatever. I recommend listening to it, because even if you've already seen the film, listen to it back to back with Bob Dylan. He really does, and so does Monica Barbara with Joan Baez, really try to add their own style
Yeah.
to the music. And I do think that's really important because I think we're in a terrible landscape of biopics where everyone's trying to recreate what a celebrity meant to somebody or what they were great at. And that might not be the good move. That might not be the actual like refreshing move. The refreshing move could just be we have these like parasocial relationships with these celebrities who are playing these actors. It's because they're like these artist celebrity figures. So why not add your own sensibilities to the role? And that might seem kind of basic to listeners, but I do think that's a big deal in the landscape of biopics right now, which is really tough.
Yeah.
And I think they were excellent. So I totally agree that the musical parts of this movie are really good.
I just wanted to give it extra credit, especially too, because the singing could be something that the movie would completely like fall apart on. Because there's so much of it. If he was bad,
in particular, yeah. My extra credit is Monica Barbaro as Joan Baez.
Yeah.
I just thought she was magnetic. Like Timmy has a gravitational pull, but so does she. And it's really hard because like she's not really given a huge character. She's not given a lot of screen time. But every time she is on screen, like I can't look away.
Yes.
Like she has like an iconic face. Like, and I think that is going to afford her a lot of opportunities in movies like this. Unfortunately, women are not given complex roles in like this male-dominated industry, especially in terms of like so many men writing films like this in this space. But I hope that she is given more complicated, complex roles because she clearly is going to be like on our screen for the foreseeable future, just because she is such an interesting person to look at. She just looks cinematic, and so the fact that she's also a good actor is awesome.
Yeah.
Obviously, Tom Cruise knows something. He literally just came for her, and he said that she's going to be like a big star.
Yeah.
So that's pretty cool.
She was almost my extra credit. So
yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, that was the extra credits of A Complete Unknown. This is a new video format on our podcast. If you're watching at YouTube, don't forget to like and subscribe. No hate comments, please. Just like, just observations, or if you want to clear some things up, let us know.
If you have an opinion, that's cool too.
Yeah, just nothing too negative.
Are you putting this on the end?
I'm putting the glasses on for the end.
Okay.
What else do we have? It's Timothée Chalamet month. You can follow our letterbox in the description, but you can also follow our Patreon in the description where we're doing Timothée Chalamet month. We have a ranking of Chalamet's movies on Letterboxd, but we're also covering Little Woman and what else? Call Me by Your Name on Patreon, as well as Moonlight. But that's not a Chalamet movie, but it's a great film for this month. And if you sign up for Patreon right now as a free member, you'll have access to Dune Part 1, which is a deep dive we have just for exclusive members on Living Plus. But you will have access to a 4+ hour deep dive of our conversation about one of our favorite filmmakers, Denis Villeneuve, and one of our favorite actors, Timothée Chalamet, among some other great actors. We talk a lot about Oscar Isaac's beard. You'll enjoy that conversation. So, check us out there. See you guys.
Bye.